Coming up on FaceTime.
When I first moved to China, most of the business models had to take advantage of China as a manufacturing base. But today, China is a destination for consumers.
Could you tell us what you think are the differences between American and Chinese entrepreneurs?
Chinese entrepreneurs, they study voraciously all the developments that are happening in Silicon Valley, as well as all the developments happening in mainland China.
Hello everyone, welcome to FaceTime. I'm your host, Helena Shi. Today we're very honored to have 去哪儿 co-founder Fritz Demopoulos with us in New York.
去哪儿 .com is one of China's largest travel portals with over 40 million monthly unique visitors and venture-backed by big-name firms such as Mayfield and GSR. During his tenure as the CEO, Fritz negotiated a $306 million deal with Baidu to sell a majority stake in 去哪儿, making it the largest private transaction in the history of the Chinese internet at the time. 去哪儿 then went public on the Nasdaq in 2013 and raised $167 million at its IPO. You probably can imagine that 去哪儿, China's travel giant, was founded by an American who speaks very little Chinese. A native of Southern California, Fritz first came to China with a News Corporation at which he was responsible for a range of business development projects. Prior to 去哪儿, Fritz co-founded Shawei.com, China's largest sports portal. After securing investments from Intel, SoftBank, and IDG, the company was profitably acquired by Tom.com. So how did the Lao Wai build China's travel giant? What are some of the behind-the-scenes stories of 去哪儿's early days? How to build a successful startup team and effectively extract resources as an entrepreneur? Fritz Demopoulos seems to have cracked the code. Hi, Fritz.
Hi, Helena. How are you?
Good. It's so honored to have you here today.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
So you're a native of Southern California and you were born and raised in the United States. You first went to China with the News Corp. What brought you to China?
That's right. I was an expat and Mr. Murdoch was building a team in China, and I was fortunate to have a chance to work for the News Corporation in Beijing, which was an amazing experience.
Did you speak any Chinese back then?
You know, back then I didn't speak any Chinese, and I remember my first day in Beijing. I was walking down the street and I didn't want to make eye contact with anybody. I felt so much like a foreigner.
You founded 去哪儿 with Douglas Koo and Zhuangchen Zhao. You're American and Douglas is Malaysian, so two out of the three co-founders are foreigners in China. Now looking back, would you have chosen the same team?
I mean, absolutely. C.C. Zhuang, he's an amazing technologist and also an amazing leader and strategist. And Douglas Koo, he's an expert in online marketing and sales. And myself, coming from the media industry and business development and general management, we thought that's a good team.
What was it like, starting a company with a team like this that's so diverse?
Well, that's the key, is you really want a diverse team because you want skill sets that complement each other. And the only way to do that is to have a diverse set of skills. Too many founders we see, they hire people just like themselves, but that's the wrong way to do it.
How did you balance roles and responsibilities with your co-founders?
Yeah, that's a bit of a negotiation, it's a bit of a balance, and it's a bit of a challenge. I mean, over time, our skills develop and evolve, and some of us develop unique strengths, and so we always have to be aware of what are our skills, what are our capabilities, what are our strengths, and what are our weaknesses. So one of the key things, I think, is to be self-aware and to understand where are we. It's very, very important.
So what are your skills? What are your weaknesses and strengths?
Well, I think I have a lot of weaknesses. It's so many that I could talk for hours about them. But I think that I've been fortunate to have lived in China for a long time and to have seen many of the changes in the Chinese market, which I think has been a huge advantage.
What are some of the changes that you've seen?
The rise of the Chinese consumer. When I first moved to China, most of the business models had to take advantage of China as a manufacturing base. But today, China is a destination for consumers. Large multinationals and local companies are targeting the Chinese consumer. And those consumers, they have high savings rates. They definitely want to spend money. And after working for so many years, they want to enjoy life a little bit. That's a perfect consumer group to reach out to.
And I guess now going back to 去哪儿, how did you come up with the idea? Could you share with us some of the stories, behind the scenes stories when you founded 去哪儿?
CC, Douglas, and myself, we wanted to start a business. And we didn't know how to do it. Or we didn't know what to focus on. At that time, one of the most successful and largest companies in the world was Google in 2004. And so we thought, okay, if Google is this big, can we take a piece of Google for ourselves? And we started thinking, what were the pieces of Google? And we analyzed each one of those businesses, and we drew the conclusion that travel was one of the most attractive. And that's how we did it. It was a very, very top-down approach. Some people, when they set up a business, they want to change the world. That's what Mark Zuckerberg wants to do. He wants to change the world. Other entrepreneurs, they want to solve a very, very specific problem that they face. Like Brian Chesky at Airbnb. He had a very specific problem in San Francisco, which was there weren't enough hotel rooms. And so he thought, how can I solve that problem? Easy, help people to rent out their spare bedrooms. And a third way to set up a business, which is the way we did it, which was taking a top-down approach. Where do people make money, and can we take a piece for ourselves? And that was our inspiration for setting up the business.
So you guys had an office in Guangdong, and obviously a lot of customers who are, Cantonese. Could you tell us more about how you expanded to the Guangdong market, preferences of, the customers in Guangdong?
We think that Cantonese customers like outdoor activities. They like spending a lot more money on sports. They like to travel more than most typical Chinese. And of course they like their food. Mm-hmm. And they like anything that crawls, I suppose. And a great zest for life. That was a great consumer group.
You mentioned earlier about Shawei.com. So prior to 去哪儿, you co-founded Shawei.com, and you were able to secure investments from Intel, IDG, and SoftBank. 去哪儿 obviously was also venture-backed by a lot of big names such as Mayfield and GSR. How are you able to attract so many investors, for your venture in China?
That's a great question. One of the key responsibilities of a CEO is resource extraction. That means trying to get financial resources, trying to get people resources, government resources, partnership resources. And so obviously trying to extract financial resources is really important. But there wasn't a secret. We had a great business plan. We invested in our team. We always built a core team before we talked to investors. So we had a nice team in place already. We had a great product. The product worked. Let's try to get some customers, because that will show that the concept potentially can work. And then we would reach out to investors, and they tended to be impressed with us. But I would add, 30 investors turned us down. Just like Brian Chesky, he talked to 30 venture capital firms, and they all turned him down. And the 31st firm actually invested in his Series A. When we raise money from investors, it takes a long time. We have to be organized and focused, and we have to have we call it thick skin, because we're going to get turned down a lot, and that's just normal.
Foreign tech companies have a tendency to fail in China. For example, eBay, Groupon, Google, and Facebook. Many wonder what are the differences between Chinese and American startup landscapes. How can Americans succeed in China's business culture?
We have to recognize, what value does a foreign company provide to the Chinese market? Is it expertise, like local expertise? Of course not, because they're foreigners, they're not Chinese. Is it capital? Not really, because China has enough capital. Is it technology? Maybe, maybe not. In fact, most technology today is open source. And the computer science textbooks in China today are actually written in English in many cases. So we don't know, what do foreign companies really add to the Chinese ecosystem? There might be a little bit, but not much. And so it makes it very, very difficult for these companies to actually operate. We were lucky because I brought in amazing local talent. And to be honest, we had the right strategy as well. You can compete in the world in 3 different ways. You can be smarter than anyone else, you can cheat people, or you can be first. And we always thought it was good to be first, be the only player in the market. And Qunar, for many years, was the only player. When we were talking earlier, we talked about blue ocean strategy. We clearly had a blue ocean strategy. We had created a price comparison and discovery platform for travel products, which didn't exist before. The only players in the online travel business were sellers, but there was no discovery platform. So we were able to be the first company to build that, and so we didn't have competition in the early years of the business, or we had no meaningful competition, and that allowed us to compete very effectively. Some of the American companies that want to come in, there's already a half a dozen local players, and they all have capital, they all understand the market, they all have the same level of technology excellence as the American companies do. So it's very, very difficult for the foreigners to compete.
Obviously, back then, there was a blue ocean of opportunities for you guys. However, Peter Thiel once said that first movers are not what's important, it's the last mover. For example, Microsoft, was the last operating system. Google was the last search engine. How would you respond to that?
I'm not aware of exactly what he means by that because the winner in the market is always the last, if you think about it. Because if you're not the winner, you wouldn't be the last, right? Yes, you don't have to be first, but you better be really smart. Really, really smart. And I would argue, China, there's so many smart people. Every year, all the great universities are graduating lots of smart people who are ambitious. And people in China, not only do they understand what's happening in China, they understand what's happening in the West. There's this asynchronous flow of information. Chinese entrepreneurs, they study voraciously all the developments that are happening in Silicon Valley, as well as all the developments happening in mainland China. They just have a lot more knowledge, a lot more capability. And who wants to compete with those people? It's just too difficult. I think it's better to be first. Have some vision, of course.
So you mentioned that Chinese entrepreneurs learn really fast. So could you tell us what you think are the differences between American and Chinese entrepreneurs?
That's a great question. We in China, the market is very, very dynamic. And what we've seen globally is when markets are extremely dynamic, subject to massive change and disruption, what we tend to see is relationships are much more important. Why are relationships important? Because we can't rely upon anything else. We can only rely upon the relationships with people, our key staff. And those key staff members will support our vision, and they'll trust and believe in a vision. If markets are less dynamic, maybe those staffs can be more transactional. Secondly, which is what you brought up about learning, in China, a typical entrepreneur will double his or her knowledge every 18 months. You could say it's Moore's law of knowledge acquisition. Probably every 18 months, double their knowledge. I don't know if entrepreneurs in the Valley are doubling their knowledge every 18 months. Third, in terms of work-life balance, which is very, very interesting, American entrepreneurs go snowboarding on the weekends. Chinese entrepreneurs, what do they do on the weekend? Well, they work like they were working on Monday through Friday. So there's a deeper and crazier work culture. I think Chinese entrepreneurs come from a much more modest background, generally speaking. And people who come from a modest background tend to work harder, and they tend to be a little bit more crazy because they have nothing to lose. Whereas statistically, and studies have shown that American entrepreneurs within the tech space tend to be middle and upper middle class Americans. And so it's a different background. There's a different feeling.
So you mentioned three things. First is that relationships are very important in China. Second is that Chinese entrepreneurs learn faster. And third is that they work really hard. How did you overcome those obstacles? How did you compete with local entrepreneurs?
Well, I work hard too, I guess. They say the number one trait for a successful entrepreneur is self-awareness, understanding limitations. So I clearly knew my limitations, so I was able to build a great team around me to really address those limitations. So we had to make sure that we had well-established and strong talent who were Chinese working in the company.
How about in terms of the first thing you mentioned, relationships? How do you deal with that? Are there any China secrets? Do you drink baijiu?
I don't drink baijiu, but I have my own strategies, that's for sure. I mean, I play tennis, I play golf. I read a lot of books. You know, building relationships, there are some cultural elements to it, that's for sure. But what we've discovered is there's many, many effective ways to build relationships beyond, the baijiu culture, to be honest. And we were able to deploy many of those.
Fritz has always kept an eye on Guangdong's consumer market and startup landscape. As the former CEO of Qunar, he recognized that Guangdong was one of Qunar's largest markets. Now, as an investor, he believes in the enormous potential for both entrepreneurs and investors in China, especially Guangdong.
It's always a great time to set up a business in China. It just depends what business and where.
So what businesses you think have huge potential right now?
I'm super excited about education, especially K-12 private education. I think there's going to be a revolution in how we teach our kids, how we learn ourselves, based on new developments in technology and new types of platforms such as virtual reality, big data, personalization, AI, and all those trends are coming to a fold and will have an impact on how we effectively educate ourselves or educate our kids. So I'm super excited about that.
Now you're sitting on the other side of the table as an investor, a founding partner of Queen's Road Capital. And you're based in Hong Kong, which is right next to Guangzhou. Do you still keep an eye on Guangdong's startup landscape?
I mean, absolutely. I have a team. Two of my team members speak Cantonese, and my wife speaks Cantonese too. I guess she's part of the team.
Is she Cantonese?
Yeah, she's Cantonese. Spent a long time in Shenzhen and Guangzhou. So in terms of our key strategies, Guangzhou and Shenzhen are two, and Hong Kong. Those three cities we focus on a lot as we try to originate interesting deals, deploy capital, and work with entrepreneurs. So those three cities we're super excited about. The Pearl River Delta.